It's good to be with you again this morning. I'm actually quite glad that I could preach these 2 Sundays in a row because the scripture from last Sunday seems to be really important to understanding the scripture from this Sunday. So in case you weren't here last Sunday, or in case you've forgotten a few things, I'd like to just give a little recap before we start. You know, it's like some of those television programs where they recap it at the beginning, and that takes a lot of the time. So if you weren't here last week, we had the story of the Good Samaritan. The story where the lawyer is speaking to Jesus and he's asking Jesus, what will it take to get into the kingdom of heaven? What is it that you require of me? And when he's told that it's required of him to love his neighbor, he says, well then, who is my neighbor? He's looking for a legal definition of who his neighbor might be. And in the end, Jesus indicates to him that it's really important for him to show love and concern for all people, that everyone is his neighbor. And so as Jesus speaks to this man, he is telling him that you need to go out into the world and do things. You need to act. You need to care. You need to love. You need to be doing. That's what you need to be doing. Doing things. Okay, so we got that part last week. Now this week we have the story of Mary and Martha, these sisters who Jesus has gone to visit. Now just as Jesus chose a Samaritan to be kind of the central part of his story last week, that key role of the Samaritan is Jesus sort of taking up for someone who's a foreigner in the land, someone that's not really thought of as being quite as good as everybody else. Now in this story, Jesus is here with 2 women. And once again, Jesus is challenging the societal attitudes. This week's passage has the women playing a central role in Jesus' teaching story. This story that Jesus is offering to these women is one where he's using them as an example. Now, what's the problem with Jesus using women as an example here? If you know anything about biblical times at all, you know that first of all, men and women didn't talk to each other in those days. Good women did not speak to men, and good men did not speak to women. It was not really a socially acceptable thing. Now, on the other hand, women were not to be taught in those days. Here's Jesus sitting here talking to Mary and teaching Mary, and women aren't supposed to be taught. Women only are supposed to have just enough knowledge to be able to run a good home. They don't need to know about all this scripture stuff. They don't need to know about religion. They don't need to know about any of that stuff. The men will take care of it for them. So women weren't supposed to be taught. And let me tell you, in those days, a woman's opinion was irrelevant. Who cares what the women thought? It didn't matter. So here we have Jesus with 2 women in their home. He's teaching. And as he's teaching, he's offering a lesson to this woman that shouldn't be taught. He's speaking to women that he shouldn't be speaking to. And then a woman comes and offers her opinion about all this, and he listens to it and he responds to her. All of this is outside the norm for society in that day. just as it was outside the norm for people to be thinking about a Samaritan having something to teach them. Who is this Jesus who thinks that foreigners and women are worthy of his attention? That's a whole point that we could spend a lot of time pondering. And that's not really the direction I'm going to go in today. But I'd like you to think about that down the line. This week when your mind is blank and you need something to do, think about who is this Jesus who spends his time talking and working with foreigners and women when that's really not an acceptable thing. But coming back to the story of Mary and Martha. In the last story, Jesus instructs the lawyer to go out and to do things, to take care of people. It doesn't matter who it is that needs to be taken care of. He needs to go out and take care of them. Everyone is his neighbor. Now today we find that Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus and she's listening to him as he talks to her. Maybe he's sharing some scripture with her. Maybe he's sharing with her some of the things that he's been doing. Whatever it is, Jesus is talking and Mary is sitting and listening. Now, meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Martha is hard at work. She is seeing to the hospitality that she is expected to offer here for Jesus. She's seeing to the hospitality that needs to be given this day. Now, we know from Scripture that Jesus really is big on good hospitality. And I have to say, when I come into this church, I do feel quite welcome. And I feel as if people are offering good hospitality here. Jesus was big on hospitality. And in other stories, we hear where he is praising those who are offering extravagant hospitality. Jesus wants us to be good servants. He told the lawyer to go out and do and care for others. But what does he say to Martha today? Martha comes out of the kitchen to complain. And Jesus says, Mary's doing the better thing. She's sitting here listening. She's not off there being busy and doing things. She's sitting here listening. She's doing the better thing. It's a greater virtue to sit here and listen today. Now, come on. This to me sounds like a contradiction. What does Jesus want from us? Well, I've got to tell you, in the whole nature of full disclosure, I have to say that I am Martha. I am Martha. I was the oldest child in my family, and if you read about oldest daughters, a lot of times you find them saying that the oldest daughter becomes sort of a servant in the family. My mother became quite ill when I was in about the 3rd grade, and for a whole year she was really unable to do much of anything in the family. In fact, she spent a whole month in the hospital. It's hard to imagine in this day and age anybody spending a whole month in the hospital. They wouldn't let you do that, but then she did. And so as a 3rd grader, I learned how to cook, and I learned how to do the laundry. And do you remember how you did the laundry back in the 50s and 60s? You had a washing machine where you threw the clothes in, and then you put them through a wringer, and then you threw them back in, and you filled the tub with water. And this was a pretty labor-intensive thing for an adult, let alone a person in 3rd grade. But I learned to do all those things, and so I was sort of the little mother there for a while, and my mother got better and was back to doing things. But as soon as I got my driver's license, then my job was to chauffeur my younger siblings back and forth to band practice and play practice and all these kinds of things they wanted to do after school that I never got to do because there was no one to drive me back and forth. So, you know, I had a lot of practice being Martha, taking care of people. Perhaps all of that influenced my decision to go into ministry because I wanted to be of service to others. Yes, I am proud to say that I am a Martha. There was a study done in the Catholic Church some years ago. And in this study, they looked at all the work that was getting done in their church. And they asked, who's doing this work? You know what they found out? 85% of the work getting done in the Catholic Church was done by the women. Okay, how many women are priests? How many women are popes? How many women are in major leadership positions in the church? The women were doing the work. A lot of Marthas out there. I know that there are probably some Marthas back in the kitchen right now, and if they're not, they're sitting here thinking about what they have to do when they get back in the kitchen in a little bit. Why does Jesus seemingly contradict himself here today? First he's saying, go out and do, care for other people, be a servant. And now he's saying to Martha, it would be more virtuous for you to sit down and listen for a little bit. Well, I think that perhaps Jesus is letting us know that there is no one answer that's right for everyone. I think that perhaps Jesus is letting us know that we need some of both. We need to work, we need to do, we need to act. But we also need time to sit and listen and be quiet. And both of those things are important. When I was working on the message this morning, there's a website you can go to that has artwork that illustrates the scripture. And I went and I looked up the picture for today's scripture passage, and I was really struck by it. I ended up printing it out, and I had it where I pinned up where I work to think about it this week because it was a very striking picture, and I'll have it laying up here. So if you want to come up after worship and get a look at it, you can. But to describe it, you see in the background Jesus with Mary sitting at his feet, and he's talking, and his hand's kind of up like he's making a point. And then in the foreground you have Martha. And Martha has the most disgruntled, disgusted look on her face you ever saw. She looks very put upon. And she's stirring something, and there's a couple of fish on the table, and you know she has a lot to do, and you know that she's getting kind of grumpy about this because her sister's sitting in there just listening. This picture made me think a little bit about Mary and Martha that day. I wonder, is it really good hospitality when you are not really happy about what you're doing? Is it really good hospitality when you feel put upon? If you go to a restaurant and the person who is serving you is cheerful, they take time to answer questions for you. They let you think, do I want this or do I want that? No, maybe I want something else. They're patient with you, and they have this sort of relaxed attitude. Or there could be the servant when you go to the restaurant who is efficient. The servant who gets things done, but the servant who does not smile, who is busy rushing about, and when you have a lot of questions says, oh, everything